Welcome back, everyone. We are now resuming this class. This is the 10th intercession. So, to give an idea of what we were discussing in the last session, we were giving an example of how some of the Vedantic scriptures describe our journey in spiritual life. As an example, I was referring to a very minor, rather short Vedantic work. It is an introduction or a primer to Advaita Vedanta, or let us say in general to spiritual life as a whole. That comes in the Viveka Chudamani, and the verse that I quoted was this: Ko nama kathamesha gataka patham pradishtha asya katham vimokshaka koso anatma paramakva atma tayor viveka kathamedat uchyedam. These 7 questions are asked by a student to a teacher. These questions are like this. See, what is the meaning of bondage, or what is bondage? I mentioned earlier, bondage is an idea that comes to us when we feel that there is much more to life than just physical enjoyments. When we reach a point in our life, this could happen as a result of contemplation, deep thinking, and also the natural inclination for all intelligent human beings to look for something higher, something nobler, something transcendental. So such persons will feel, well, this life, in the sense, this material life, a life which is directed towards the fulfillment of material desires, it is inherently imperfect, incomplete. There should be a higher principle, there should be a higher goal in human life than just the enjoyment of sensory pleasures and enjoyments. Such persons will feel is a bondage. So what is this bondage? Then how this came about, and then how is it sustained, and what is the way out? What is liberation? What is spiritual enlightenment? And then what is the absolute reality, Atma, and what is the opposite of it? And how do we distinguish these two? How do we distinguish what is the higher eternal principle, and what is the opposite of it, the relative, the insignificant? In fact, we can find this in our life. There are many things that we feel which are more of paramount importance in our life. And there are certain things that we know, essentially we know that they are of a fleeting nature. They are essentially non-eternal. But how do we distinguish this? So this was the verse that we discussed in the last session. And of course, we discussed a few more other important verses. And another very important verse that we discussed was, it is the 326th of the verse that speaks about this psychology of distraction or falling out of the way in our spiritual life. How do we encounter problems which take us away from our spiritual path? And there was a very beautiful imagery. The Shankaracharya gives it's a graphic description of how we unconsciously get distracted away from our central principle, our primary spiritual goal. So this imagery, the story was given, let's say a little boy playing with a ball. He happens to drop the ball, and is standing on the top of a staircase, and the ball falls through his fingers. It hits the top step of the staircase. Then it falls down step 1, 2, 3, like that. The ball doesn't stop till it hits the rock bottom of the staircase. Like that, in human life also frequently this happens. We can see, in fact, if you look closely study the lives of many great men, sometimes it was the realization that they are missing something higher in their life that actually give a wake-up call in their life. Many mystics, many saints, many philosophers, many great men and women who are known for making great contribution to mysticism and philosophy. There was one turning point in their life when they suddenly realized that, well, the ball is actually about to fall through their fingers, the ball is about to hit the top layer of the staircase. But they could prevent that from happening, and they affected a turning point in their life, and they ended up being great mystics. And also, unfortunately, there are the opposite examples. Also, many criminals, many people, many unfortunate people happen to be distracted by some external forces, by negative influences and negative attractions. Just like the boy who actually drops the ball on the top of the staircase. Suddenly he finds the ball doesn't stop till he reaches the rock bottom. Similarly, wrong associations, wrong attractions, unfortunate or undesirable connections sometimes bring about tragedy in human life. That example was given in a very powerful language. It's a graphic description of the psychology of human error. Lakshachudam chet yadi chittameshat bahirmukham sannipadet tatastataha pramadata prachudaka elikantukaha sopana panktu patido yathatha. Says one word is used, sopana pankti, means a flight of steps. Does it mean? Now, what are these flight of steps? Suddenly we may get distracted towards a wrong ideal, a wrong association, and that could be the beginning of tragedy in human life. Now, in this context, I'm going to introduce another very important text from Vedanta canonical literature. That is Chandogya Upanishad, where how a person who gets distracted in spiritual life, who somehow gets lost in spiritual journey, how a person is saved, is brought back to the spiritual path. It is found in the sixth chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad, which is actually part of Samaveda. I briefly referred to this, but didn't go deeper into this text in a different context in the previous sessions. Those of you who are interested, you can later read. It comes the 14th section, or 14th khanda of the 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad. It gives an interesting example. First, I shall just read or recite this section, and then I shall give a brief description of what it actually is talking about, what it deals with. Yatha soumya purisham gandharebhyo abhinadhakshamaniya tam tato adhijane visirjit sa yatha tatra prangva adangva dhirangva pratyangva pratmatida abhinadhaksha anitaha abhinadhaksho visishtaha tasya yatha abhinahanam pramuchya Prabhruyat etam disham gandharaha edam disham praja idi sa gramad gramam prichan pandido methavi gandharaneva upasampadhyeda evameva ika acharyavan purusho veda tasya tavadevam chiram yavat na vimokshe atha sampatsi iti saya esha anima idadatnimitam sarvam tasatyam sa atma tattvamasi shetakido idi bhuya eva ma bhagavan vijñapayadu idi atha Swami hovacha. Chaturdasha khanda. It is 14th khanda, means 14th section of the 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad. It again tells the story of a man who was traveling from one place to another place. He had come to his Gurukula, means the teacher's hermitage, And after studying for 12 years, he's going back to his spiritual home. Now, on the way, what happens? He is ambushed. He's walking through this forest road, and on the way, he was ambushed. All these possessions taken away from him by robbers, and then he was dragged to the thick forest. And there he was tied to a tree, and he was blindfolded. This is the story. And then after some time, the robbers left. This man starts crying and weeping. That weeping, crying, all those ideas are not given in the text. It is a Shankaracharya. I mean, the simple story, but Shankaracharya imposes a mystical spiritual significance, giving some spiritual symbology and the story. So he's dragged to the thick forest, taken away from the main road, tied to a tree, blindfolded, can't speak. What he does, he makes a lot of loud noises. So one man who was actually walking the same road happened to hear this crying sound coming from the middle of the forest. And he goes there. He unties the ropes and he brings him back to the main road. And then he tells him, you take this road and you'll get back to your home. This is the story. That's why, here it's very big. For example, you say, Tasya yatha abhinaganam pramuchya prabruyad. So the compassionate traveler, he hears this sound coming from the thick forest, from the man who was ambushed and tied to a tree. And then he says, Edam disham Gandhara, Edam disham Vraja iti. So Gandhara roughly corresponds to today's Kandahar in today's Afghanistan, which is part of ancient Vedic culture in India. So this man was coming from there. So the compassionate traveler tells him, you take this road and you get back to your home. Here it is not home in the ordinary sense of the term. You can get back to your spiritual goal. So in this story, there is a great symbology. That is a significance. The symbology is provided by Shankaracharya in his commentary. It is something like this. See, the person who was ambushed, taken away from the main road, who is tied to a tree, he is the ordinary human beings. Let's say the spiritual seekers. Those who want to live a spiritual life. Here, remember, spiritual life doesn't mean living in a forest. Spiritual life here means practicing some spiritual ideals or principles in our everyday life. That's what it means. Not necessarily either living in a forest or a hermitage or anything. When you get attracted to some higher principle in life, then what happens? Suddenly, he's distracted. Maybe wrong associations with an idea, with a concept, or even with persons. Suddenly, we may get distracted in our life. At that moment, we may not know we are being distracted. So what happens then is taken away from the main road. Who are the people who ambushing him? According to the Advaita commentators, punya papa or karma phala. It's karma phala. Karma phala it is a Sanskrit word, but it means the results of our own previous actions. Whatever we have done in the past, those actions will create a residual impact on the mental system, and that will drag our mind in different directions. So the burden of our own past, our habits, our own experiences will always create our emotions and feelings, will dominate or influence our feelings and emotions. And they may not allow us, maybe in our baggage of samskaras or impressions, there are good samskaras and there are also maybe bad samskaras. Bad samskaras are the results of wrong actions. Wrong actions, papa means the results of wrong actions. In simple English, we can put. Punya means results of good actions. So when there is a huge, there's a huge burden or baggage of wrong or negative samskaras, karma phalas, frequently we are not able to concentrate on some spiritual ideal. We feel disturbed. We feel shaky all the time. That's because the stock of good samskaras is not enough. So we should generate good samskaras through good actions, reading good books, associating with people whose association will help us to develop good emotions and feelings. So when we try to generate good samskaras, good karma phalas, then distractions will be less. So robbers correspond to wrong samskaras, negative karma phalas, as we call in Sanskrit. And then, as I mentioned, this man was blindfolded by the robbers. And blindfold is a piece of cloth. That is our own delusions, our attractions towards worldly desires. Attractions toward worldly desires, in a sense, infatuation or certain desires, certain attractions which spiritually and psychologically make us slaves. We want to get out of them, but we cannot, putting us in a state of total helplessness. So that corresponds to the piece of cloth by which our eyes are bound, so we cannot see what is going on. So the wrong karma phalas create a blindfold, and we get attracted towards wrong things, and we are dragged away from the main road of spiritual life. And then our own obsessions with the world, our own obsessive desires for worldly enjoyments, it corresponds to the ropes by which we are tied to a tree in this story. So the only way out is a person should develop a desire for spiritual enlightenment. It's called a mukshutva. So in the story we found this ambushed person. He is making a lot of noise. He cries and weeps. And in fact, in Shankaracharya's language, he has very graphically put this crying sound. I can just, interestingly, you can find. He says, Aham amushya putro mama ide bantavaha sukhi akam dukhi mudha pandido dharmiko bandhuman jato mrudo jirna pabi putro me mrudo dhanam me nashtam ha hatosmi katam jivishyami ha me kadagitikam, etc. So me kagatihi kim me tranam. So what it means is, I'm happy now, I'm unhappy after some time. I have plenty of money now, and again my money will be lost. So I go through these changing cycles of extreme enjoyments and extreme tragedies. This is the predicament of human life. So how do I get out of this? So these are in a very pictorial, in a graphic style, Shankaracharya puts these ideas into these Upanishadic mantras. What it means is the man who is distracted from spiritual life, who is forcefully away from the main road of spiritual pilgrimage, he makes a lot of noise. So in spiritual life, one important quality that is necessary is a strong desire for higher values, a strong desire for spiritual emancipation. It's called mumukshutva. So suppose this poor man, this pilgrim who is dragged away from the main road, if he simply keeps quiet, suppose in the thick forest where he's blindfolded, he's tied to a tree, his possessions taken away by the robbers, suppose he keeps quiet, he doesn't make any noise, then nobody is going to save him. He should make a lot of noise. He should make a lot of cries. So in the classic language of Shankaracharya's commentary, he says, he says, for example, he says, Aham amushya putro mamete bantava sukhi aham dukhi mudha pandita, etc. I am miserable. I am unlucky. I am suffering. All my wealth, progeny, children, relatives, all lost. He is crying and weeping. So what it means is a person should not go about crying and weeping. He should develop what could be called a divine discontent, a higher dissatisfaction. It is not the dissatisfaction that a person may feel when he loses money. Suppose he has got everything, still he feels a kind of incompleteness or imperfection. That higher dissatisfaction, that is a key element in our spiritual life. All of us, most people will have some reason or other for dissatisfaction, no doubt. But if we can have a higher dissatisfaction, when we have everything, still I don't find a higher meaning in life. That is a higher dissatisfaction. When you experience the incompleteness of material enjoyments, you have no dearth of material enjoyment. Still you feel these material enjoyments do not constitute anything very perfect, anything that is eternal. There is something much higher that I'm seeking. That kind of higher discontentment, dissatisfaction, or urge for something noble, something higher, for something transcendental. That is what corresponds to the crying and weeping. So every person should learn to cry and weep. Literally, what it means is every person should learn to feel a kind of discontent with material things. Many people are forced to feel it. People who don't care for any higher values in life, they may succeed, but to the evening of their life, they feel a great misery. But they are forced to feel it. We always wait for a tragedy to strike before opening the eyes. That's why in the Yoga Sutras, the first sutra is Atha Yoga Anushasana. That's the first sutra in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, 195 sutras. Atha here means now onwards. Henceforth, now onwards, we are discussing, we are teaching, we are instructing yoga. Yoga here stands for higher life or spiritual life. So when do we turn to spiritual life? When we feel that we have done everything, but something doesn't seem to click. This could happen in so many different ways. One may work very hard during the time of academic training or education, get a high grade, good job, plunging deeply into whatever we do, better and higher jobs, salaries, everything. But then At that time, even while working hard for job and for enjoyment, we should always remember, I will need something higher than a very good job, a lot of money for perfect satisfaction. For real satisfaction in life, I will require something more than money and job. If we can develop that ideal and still work hard for material progress, that will be a much more intelligent way of doing things. Otherwise, we will wait till some robbers come and take us away from the main road. In this story, the pilgrim was walking along the road, and he didn't care for anything. The robbers came and took everything from him. Sometimes this happens in human life. We work hard, we succeed a lot, we make a lot of progress, but finally, at some point, we are forced to feel, we are compelled to feel this dissatisfaction. Instead of that, we should develop a higher principle, higher value, even the ordinary course of our working for material enjoyments. In this particular commentary, Shankaracharya says, Aranyam praveshato dukharto vikrosan bindujanebhya mumukshustishthadi sakkan katanchideva karunigena kenajit mokshidaha sudeshan gandharaneva vonno nirbutta sukhiya bhut. What the story means is, this man is crying and weeping. When he cries and when he weeps, then this traveler who was walking along the road comes and rescues him. Here, one important point is the traveler corresponds to a teacher, a spiritual teacher. So the compassionate traveler who heard this noise coming from the thick forest, who stops and pauses for some time, then goes in the direction of from where the place from where this crying sound is coming. He approaches the poor ambushed man. He removes the blindfold. He removes unties the ropes, brings him back to the main road. So, and this is the compassionate traveler because he is familiar with the road. He knows there are places where robbers are likely to appear and take him away from the main road. So scriptures tell us we should be careful in our everyday life. So the Paramakarunikeena Acharyana. Acharya here means a teacher or scripture. A great book can give you proper warning. This is a main road. There are robbers in spiritual life. Who are the robbers in spiritual life? Distractions, delusions. In modern times, computers, internet, many of these things can constitute robbers, take us away from our main road of spiritual life. One click on the computer can lead us to the thick forest of dangers and tragedies. So, in modern times, the compassionate traveler, who is a teacher, who is rescuing this poor man from the thick forest, can be a good book, a great scripture, or a great teacher. Because the scripture knows what is the right direction. Scripture in our present context means Upanishad scriptures. Because Upanishads tell us all about spiritual life. Upanishads do not talk about individuals. Upanishads do not tell you this only path. Other paths are wrong. Upanishads don't say that. Vedanta scriptures never tell us that this is the only book, the right book, or other books are wrong. Never tells us. Vedanta books tell us, see, look, you think, look around, and then you find what's the real source of permanent, eternal contentment and joy. That is spiritual emancipation. So you can find a very, very interesting story. There are a few important In fact, as you read the commentary, Shankaracharya's commentary, he goes on explaining. Now, suppose the compassionate traveler rescues this person from the thick forest and brings him to the main road. And then also the pilgrim who is planning to go to his native place, he should be able to understand clearly the instructions coming from the teacher. The teacher tells him in which direction to go. That is, Vedantisham Gandhara says, you take this road, then you will get back to your hometown, your spiritual hometown, spiritual destination. So the person, the pilgrim, should have intelligence, proper sense of discerning wisdom to correctly understand the meaning of instructions. And then he should be sincere and steadfast in following the instructions. In the commentary, Shankaracharya says, on the way back, he may suddenly find a garden, a forest, mango grove, and we may feel distracted. We may be attracted to some flowers, fruits, and again we may get lost from the main road. Again, we may be caught by the thieves, by the robbers. It should not happen. So when the scriptures or teachers tell us, we should clearly understand, and then we must use our own discerning wisdom to correctly follow the directions of the teacher and get back to a spiritual home. So this is a symbology of this great book, of this great work. And then another important point is, how do we show, how do we display our spiritual dissatisfaction? Coming back to the story, the pilgrim, the poor man was ambushed. He was dragged to the thick forest and he was tied to a tree, and there he should make a lot of noise. So in Vedantic tradition means you must first of all feel a kind of strong dissatisfaction with the existing conditions. Actually, if a person can develop a kind of spiritual discontent or a divine discontent, he can get out of all other kinds of discontents. Suppose if he can develop a strong desire for spiritual progress or attraction for spiritual ideas or dissatisfaction in not making progress in spiritual life, that dissatisfaction can help us to get rid of all other forms of dissatisfactions. The person may not have money, enough money. He may have money, but he may be still, because he may be greedy, he's seeking more money. He may only have a good job, still he is not happy. All forms of dissatisfactions. If that person can give a promotion to his dissatisfaction, can develop a dissatisfaction for material things and a strong desire for something higher, which is built upon this dissatisfaction, then he'll be able to transcend all other forms of dissatisfactions and discontentment. So every person should practice these values of spiritual urge for higher values. Now, in the traditional Vedanta scriptures, there are 4 qualifications which correspond to the urge of the struggles of a spiritual seeker. When this man was tied to a tree, he was making a lot of noise. If he had not made enough noise, he had made if he had not made loud noise, crying noises, the compassionate traveler would not have listened, would not have understood. Here is a poor man tied to a tree, ambushed and put in the thick forest. So nobody will know, and he will die a miserable death in the thick forest. So, to avoid a tragedy, you should go on making noises. So you can find in Sri Ramakrishna's gospel, there is a very, very beautiful language, Sri Ramakrishna says, there are different varieties of fish. And the fisherman goes about catching fish, all kinds of fish. Some fish cannot be caught. They remain in water. Some fish get caught, but they remain in the net for a second and they jump out and they escape. And there are some types of fish which think that they are caught in the net. It's a very wonderful place. They don't know that they'll be cooked and eaten very soon. So like that, the fish that was caught for a second but tried to escape, who jumped out of the net without making that noise, no one can make a progress in spiritual life. In the Mandukya Karika, there is a text, Anadi Maya Sukto Yatha Jiva Prabhuddhide Ajamanidrama Suktam Advaidam Buddhide Tatha. So those who do not develop this struggle or the desire for spiritual values, spiritual ideals, they are in deep slumber. On the one hand, it is deep slumber. On the other hand, when they suddenly get up, when they look at the world around, they feel miserable. So even when we are in waking state, we should cultivate some higher values. Some intellectual interest in higher values itself is a great blessing. Some kind of intellectual interest for higher spiritual values. It could be cultivated by reading books. It could be cultivated by listening to ideas, or maybe associating with people who discuss spiritual topics. All these are different ways of intellectually connecting, intellectually getting hooked into some spiritual ideas that will always help us in facing the realities of material life. So this story is a very, very famous one. It has got a deep spiritual symbology and a great significance for all people in modern times. It's not asking us to go into thick forest and sit under a tree for meditation. What it says is, along with our ordinary life situations, everyday life situations, we must cultivate some higher values, some higher interest in transcendental spiritual values. This is the essence of this story. Now we can have interactions. You are most welcome to ask questions based on what we discussed. Okay, thank you. Namaskar.
Swami?
Yeah.
I have a question. How does one reconcile the, I guess you would call it the divine discontent with the need to be also patient as a tree? How can one practice that extreme patience combined with, the kind of, crying out and yelling and longing?
Yeah. Thank you for this question. In fact, it will give me a chance to explain a very important principle. Now, when you develop a divine discontent, you find your discontent for other things are transcendent. That's something very interesting. You find in the lives of great mystics, some of them going through very, very difficult times. Some of them, sometimes, they were subjected to even physical torture in the lives of many mystics, or other forms of difficulties. They were not bothered, they were not deterred by any other kinds of problems, because they were going through them, but because they have this overwhelming transcendental discontent, they could actually get rid of. They never felt the weight of other problems. This is a very important thing to remember. In life, everyone will have a problem. The richest man also will have a problem. But if we can promote our problem, give a higher promotion to a problem, that will help us to face with lesser difficulties. This is the moment you try to, the spiritual life is a complicated thing. I would rather not bother. I would rather concentrate on something else. Actually, we be heading for more trouble. It's a fact. So if you feel a kind of spiritual discontent, dissatisfaction, you feel that spiritual dissatisfaction will smoothen, will help us to deal with other problems. We don't even feel the existence of other problems. This is what really happens in life. See, look at a man like Buddha. I give the example of Buddha because the story is so well known. That's for all great spiritual teachers. Buddha was very much sad, worried. You can find in Buddha Charita and in the Ashogosha's life, there are verses which describe Buddha's misery. Buddha, he was a prince living in a palace, and he saw these visions of a poor man or a sick man and a dead man being taken to the cremation ground, and also an old man. So the miseries of old age, death, and sickness. And it made him worried so much, whole night. And then he leaves his home and he walks and he reaches Bodh Gaya and sits under a tree. This is story goes. Now, you feel he was not very happy when he was walking all the way from Lumbini to Bodh Gaya, 1,200 miles nearly. He was not enjoying, but he was worried about the problems not of his life, he was worried about the problems of humanity. So when you are not worrying about your own personal material things, when you are worrying about something higher, that worry doesn't make you feel miserable. That worry doesn't make you feel wretched. It's a qualitative difference between that kind of worry. It's a man who is greedy, very rich, but very greedy, is miserable. His dissatisfaction makes him wretched and miserable. He doesn't enjoy life. But if you read the lives of many of the Christian mystics, I give the example because they had a hard time before they died. Many of them were recognized when they were alive, like St. John and all, St. Joseph and many others. But many of them were recognized only post-mortem, after their death. So when they were actually living in this world, it was a hard life. But they were not feeling wretched. Again, example is St. Teresa of Avila's example. She had always gone through a difficult time, but she always, there was a joy, the inner blissful feeling that she was communicating with Christ, God, that idea comes. So you find that kind of dissatisfaction is qualitatively different from the dissatisfaction of a very greedy man who is not satisfied with what money, what wealth he has already accumulated, looking for more. There is a feeling of being wretched, being miserable, being let down when a person is suffering worldly discontent. That's different from spiritual discontent. It's an important thing to remember. That's why many people look for look for higher values, not because they have reached nirvana or anything, but even the struggle for some higher meaning in life. Even an attempt to find out the meaning of life as a whole, they may not have reached that goal, but in the struggle, maybe sometimes unsuccessful struggle, even an unsuccessful attempt is satisfactory in a higher sense. It doesn't make you feel wretched. This is an important thing. Am I right? Don't you think so?
Yes, Swami, that's a very unique. I haven't heard that perspective. It's very enlightening. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, and there is another psychological. I often take the whole thing from the standpoint of spiritual psychology. Something interesting about it. See, if you look at the lives of these great saints, what they underwent, what struggles they had to go through, where did they get the strength to withstand those difficulties, struggles, and then persecutions, excommunications, in some cases, even the superior abbots of their own monasteries were not very good and very kind-hearted towards the novices. If I read the life of many of the mystics, you find, but still they were not affected, they were not deterred, but they were not defeated by all these struggles, because they had something. They were generating a spiritual energy, which gave them the health, the strength to withstand these problems. A wretched man did not have mental strength. Feeling wretched, it makes you mentally and physically weak. Physical weakness is something, it happens to everyone. Even Buddha or any great world teacher, spiritual saint, they had to follow the rules of 5 elements of the body. But their mind was not affected. That's a main difference. So spiritual struggles do not make you feel wretched or miserable. That's important. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Swami. Very, very enlightening.
Yeah, thank you.
Swamiji, will you be discussing the Tattva-bodha part of this?
Tattva-bodha.
Yes,
Yeah, the Tattva-bodha we will take it. It's a very small primary book. Vivekachudamani is much more comprehensive. We have discussed something much superior, but Tattva-bodha we'll discuss at some point. It contains important definitions. We'll discuss some point.
When you talk about the concept of Ishvara, in the Tattva-bodha sense, there is the Jiva and the Ishvara, and then there is the Virata and Hiranyagarbha. And what is the concept, and how are we to employ it for spiritual growth?
Yeah, I shall discuss this, but this is, of course, it's not directly related to what we are discussing just now. I shall try to link what you asked with the subject right now.
Yes.
Now, you see, coming to the subject that we discussed, this ambushed man, the pilgrim who was dragged the thick forest, he must have been, if he was a theist, if a devotee, he would be praying to God. No doubt about it. Okay. So those experiences will give a spiritual seeker a strong intensity of spiritual aspiration, and that intensity will help him to sublimate all other problems. Coming back to the subject, the word Ishvara used in Vedanta, when Brahman is reflected through cosmic Maya, the cosmic reflective medium, is called Ishvara. The same Brahman, when reflected through avidya, through the mind or buddhi, it's called jiva. So Ishvara is a concept that is not negated when you get Atmanubhuti, as Vedanta says, but the Ishvara ideal is sublimated. The moment you talk about Ishvara in Vedanta, you always think of him as the creator of this world. So long as we have the feeling of this world being real, our body being real, so long as we live at that level, the only idea of God we can think of is the God, the creator of this world. That is not negated in Vedanta. That is only transcended. So when in the in Advaita tradition, actually the episode that we discussed today, it is part of the Tattvamasi Mahavakya Vichara in the Chandogya Upanishad. And at the end of this story, actually the teacher tells the disciple that you are not the physical body. Saya Esha Anima Aidudatnimitam Sarvam Tasatyam Sa Atma Tattvamasi Shetakido Idi Puya Eva Ma Bhagavan Vijnapayadu Idi Tasome Idi Hovacha. This is the end of the 14th Khanda, 14th section. What it means is, after explaining Tattvamasi, after giving an instruction of Tattvamasi, Swetaketu went on requesting for more explanations and more examples. So Uddalaka, Swetaketu's father and his guru, goes on explaining Tattvamasi from different standpoints, giving different examples. So there are 9 times of instruction. First, main instruction, then the same instruction repeated 8 times with 8 different examples. This is one of the examples, maybe the most important example that is found in the entire chapter. So the point is, when you realize that Tattvamasi, Swetaketu, the truth that you are searching, the essence of reality that you're searching is within you, it is yourself. That's Satyam Sa Atma. That Atma, that is that supreme truth and reality, it is you yourself. This is instruction given. So Swetaketu could not understand it. Why? Because Swetaketu was still at the level of thinking of God as the creator of this world. Finally, with the 16th Khanda, with the 8th illustration, Swetaketu could understand, he became silent. Now, when he became silent, he was not rejecting Ishvara. The Ishvara concept was transcended into the all-pervading divine reality called Atman, which is present in all of us, which is present everywhere. This is an important thing to remember. Of the discussion right now is Advaita Vedanta. In Advaita Vedanta, Ishvara is not rejected. Ishvara is only transcended. In fact, if you take interest in Advaita Vedanta, your devotion to Ishvara, the puja or the ritual you're performing in a temple or in your home, the japa, all the rituals, or anybody, whatever religion we may belong to, whatever religious traditions we may belong to, those practices, whether prayers or confessions or church, the church or a synagogue or a temple or wherever it is, that practice will become much more intensified, much more real. We feel an intense intimacy with the supreme reality of Ishvara, whom we are praying to. So remember, Ishvara is not rejected in Advaita Vedanta. Ishvara ideally is transcended. Means you get a more complete realization of the supreme truth. That's me. Okay. I mentioned this earlier. Shankaracharya wrote the most exquisite devotional poems in India. And he was not doing it. He was telling God is not in the temple alone, he's everywhere. Shankaracharya was teaching all the time that God is not in the temple alone. God is an all-pervading divine reality. God is within you, Atma. But the same man wrote the most moving, most exquisite devotional poems in Sanskrit language. So Advaita only makes you a better and higher devotee. Okay, thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.